Hello, I'm John Walter, instructor for English 302, Advanced Composition, sections M01 and M03, and in this lecture I'm going to talk about analyzing sources and other readings rhetorically. So, for an overview of what I'm going to cover in this lecture, I'm going to talk about rhetorical analysis, going to talk about the writer's technique, the section from Chapter 7 of the Informed Writer I had you read this week. We're going to take a look at the Analyzing Rhetorically handout, and then talk a little bit about applying the handouts, both the reading rhetorically and analyzing rhetorically, to the essay I asked you to read last week on how Pixar's movie Inside Out shows memory, whether it shows memory accurately. So let's take a look here. So what is rhetorical analysis? To understand what rhetorical analysis is, we first need to know what rhetoric is. If you've come across the definition of rhetoric before, what you've most likely come across is Aristotle's definition of rhetoric as an ability in each particular case to see the available means of persuasion. That particular definition comes from George Kennedy's translation of Aristotle's On Rhetoric, and it's useful in the fact that it's a really good, accurate translation of Aristotle's definition. Too many people paraphrase it as just the available means of persuasion, but really for what Aristotle was saying is that it's the ability in each particular case, so to understand each thing you're going to analyze in its own context, to see the available means of persuasion. And if you've ever been assigned, to do a rhetorical analysis before, there's a good chance you were asked to analyze a piece by its use of ethos, logos, and pathos. You may have been asked also to take a look at tropes and figures, its sort of its style, its tone, etc. But ethos, logos, and pathos are often big sort of issues to look at when doing traditional rhetorical analysis. Ethos, logos, and pathos are the three appeals or modes of persuasion that are identified by Aristotle in his Rhetoric. For our purposes, however, we're going to use a broader definition of rhetoric, one offered by Charles Bazerman, same author as the Informed Writer, but from a different text. He defines rhetoric as the study of how people use language and other symbols to realize human goals and carry out human activities. Let's take a look at that again. The study of how people use language and other symbols to realize human goals and to carry out human activities. A number of 20th century scholars define rhetoric in very similar terms to Bazerman's, and I often just abbreviate this as how we make meaning. Rhetoric is the study of how we make meaning. Now, if we turn to Chapter 7 of Bazerman's The Informed Writer, we might say that a rhetorical analysis is an analysis of a writer's technique. If you haven't yet read Chapter 7 of The Informed Writer, you want to do so. Bazerman's discussion of the writer's technique includes not just a checklist of issues to consider, but an example of such an analysis, applying the questions asked in the checklist. Do note that I have incorporated most of Bazerman's checklist into our Analyzing Rhetorically handout. So, it's good to read sort of Bazerman's checklist in context of the chapter and his discussion and his examples, but the questions themselves are actually pretty much kind of incorporated into the handout, which I've also drawn from some other sources. So let's take a quick look here at Bazerman's checklist. This is about the middle of the Chapter 7. We talked about the writer's technique. First we talked about in this chapter identifying the writer's purpose, and then the technique is actually to look at all the choices, as he says here. Technique is present in every choice made by a writer at every stage of creation. So to understand a writer's technique, we have to think about everything, really, which can be overwhelming. But you can sort of kind of focus in on particular aspects. And things to consider. Bazerman asks us to consider the relationship between the writer and the reader. The writer has, supposedly, the writer has come up with some sort of relationship. If you might think back to the craft of writing, it asks us to think about the role that we as writers want to assume and the roles that we imagine our audience assuming. And so that relationship, is the writer asking the reader to do anything? Or is the reader just supposed to be passive? Does the writer address the reader as as an expert speaking to other experts, or is it an expert speaking to a general reader? Does the writer use humor, drama, unusual examples, etc.? And I'm not going to read all of these. I expect you can go through and read it all. I'm not just going to read it here, but some things to consider. The structure. Look at the whole structure of how the thing is put together. How is it organized? Is it organized by chronology, by grouping topics together? Does it walk through steps of logical argument, use comparison, association, etc.? Content choices. What parts does the author go into a lot of detail in? What parts get summarized? Does the author leave out important topics? How does the author expand on topics? How are they developed? Were arguments used? Were anecdotes told? Does the expansion of statements prove the statements? Help the reader understand? So when they expand something, if they kind of go on to a particular topic, what's their goal there? What are they doing? Are they trying to prove? Provide support? Are they trying to help you, kind of give you more context to understand? Are they trying to keep you amused or interested? Are they actually trying to obfuscate, confuse you, kind of snowball you so you don't pay attention to what's missing or think about other issues that they don't want you to think about? Kinds of evidence. Again, this is very much sort of a disciplinary question. Statistics, anecdotes, quotations, scientific theories, definitions, appeals to emotion, imagination. What kind of evidence gets used in a piece? How do they reference? When they do use references, how do they reference things exactly? Is it referenced by title, paraphrase, summary? Is there any indirect references? Do they rely on other sources? Do they give you documentation? Is there bibliography? Where do they cite? Newspapers, diaries, specialized scholarly studies, best-selling nonfiction, literary works, etc. And then you can actually get down into issues of precision. How precise are they being in the various issues they're discussing? You can actually look at the language itself, at the sentence structure, and even down to the word structure, word choice. What kind of words are they using? Are they using technical terms? Are they using emotionally charged language or scientifically objective language? And also, why? It's useful to think about why. Why is someone trying to use scientifically objective language, especially if it's not in what we think is a scholarly scientific paper? What are they trying to do by doing that? If it's a letter to the editor, or they're making sort of a policy appeal on whether or not you should have a factory move into your neighborhood. So, like I said, then he actually talks about the importance of analyzing technique, and then gives you an example here. So we can move on. I want to take a quick look at the handout, the Analyzing Rhetorically handout, and as I do so, I want to stress that, well, there's a lot of things listed on the handout, just as there's a lot of things listed in Bazerman's checklist. It's good to sort of look at all of these things and to kind of think about them and figure out whether or not they're worth answering for your particular thing, but for the piece you're looking at, because different pieces are going to have different things that are important that you want to analyze, that are going to be meaningful for that particular text, that particular thing you're trying to analyze. But even if you do answer every single thing here, you're not, when you put your rhetorical analysis together, you're not going to actually discuss each and everything. And definitely don't use the handout, don't use the checklist as sort of like okay, I'm going to answer this section first and just write about this, then write about this, and write about this. You want to, in the order of the handout, or the order of the checklist, you want to sort of think about how things work together and cluster ideas to help develop your own argument. So, the handout. Here we go. I know part of the handout draws heavily from Dr. Deborah Huffman of Indiana University, or IPFW, Indiana University, Purdue University, Fort Wayne, and from Booth, Coleman, and Williams, The Craft of Research, and from Bazerman's The Informed Writer. So it's got kind of three sources coming in together here. And as I note again, not all questions are relevant for every text, and then when you write a rhetorical analysis, you want to be selective in what you write about. So you may identify these issues and then decide, I'm not going to talk about that in this piece. So, questions like audience. Who cares most about the subject? And who's likely to be reading about it? What might their concerns be? And are those concerns addressed? Those things they want? Again, the role of the writer, the role of the audience. What do you think a reader might remember most about something? The writer and the writer's stance towards the subject. What is the writer's attitude towards the subject? Why? And that's always a good question because this is for sort of an analysis. You want to think about not just the answer itself, but why. What gives you that impression? If you want to try to be able to pinpoint specific things in the text you're analyzing, is it objective? The publication itself, what kind of reputation does it have? What is it? What do the readers expect from it? Relationship between the reader and the writer. Does the writer make sure the reader follows the discussion? Do they help you kind of work through it? Do they use humor or draw more unusual examples? Does the writer expect the reader to have a lot of specialized knowledge, or does the writer assume that the readers are not going to have specialized knowledge? The context. What has been said about the subject before? Because often people are talking about things within a context, and conversations are going on about a topic, and so what else is being said? Is it connected to current events or popular issues? If it's published in like a magazine or other sort of format in which there's going to be other texts around it, what kind of texts are they? The purpose, what is the purpose for the writer in presenting it? Is the writer kind of announcing their thesis? What's the genre of the text? What information gets presented first? Does it use pictures or graphics? What parts of the text are brought out? Are there sort of kind of like larger size text or sidebars, call-out quotes? What's the medium? Is it a book? Is it a journal, scholarly journal? Is it a slick magazine that you buy in the grocery store checkout line? Is it a web page? Take a look at the content itself. Are you asked to believe certain ideas, take certain actions? What gets emphasized? How do you know it's being emphasized? Is there more than one perspective offered in the text? How do you know? Why do you think that may be the case or not? Kinds of evidence that get used. Is it personal belief and anecdotes, direct quotations from letters, diaries, literature? Is it quantitative data gathered in laboratory experiments and surveys? How is this information used to support the main idea? Statistics, anecdotes, appeals to common sense, appeals to the imagination. What's the structure? How does the structure of the piece hold together? Again, issue questions, levels of precision, the use of references, sentence structure, word choice again. Okay, so let's take a look at sort of talk a little bit about applying these to Jennifer Talarico's Does Pixar's Inside Out Show How Memory Actually Works?, which I asked you to read last week. So before we start taking a look at the questions of the Analyzing Rhetorically handout, it might be helpful if we actually start with the Reading Rhetorically handout to help us kind of get some more context of the piece. Okay, so let's take a look at the Reading Rhetorically handout here. First thing it asks us to do is, what kind of source is this? Is it a primary source, secondary source, tertiary source? Let's take a look at the article here. So we're looking at this article, this piece here, we kind of go through, and if you've read it, you're actually going to know that this is a tertiary, what Booth, Cullum, and Williams would identify as a tertiary source. It is a piece written for a general audience in which is based off of scholarly sources. So, it's a tertiary source. Where's the publication? Who are the likely readers? When was it published? What's the publication's self-stated purpose or goal? So let's take a look. Where was this published? Okay, so we can see here there's something called the conversation, academic rigor, journalistic flair. Okay, so we've got an idea here. We might also just note, because one of the things you might imagine, essentially it's going to ask about the author. So while we're looking around, we might also see Jennifer Tallarico, Associate Professor of Psychology at Lafayette College. Okay, so we've got someone who's actually a professor, a psychologist, and disclosure statement. Disclosure statements, is there any sort of, you can get the context from here. It says here that Tallarico does not work for, consult, or own shares in any, or receive any funding from any company or organization that would benefit from this article, and has disclosed no relevant affiliations beyond the academic appointment above. So basically, what we know from the conversation, this sort of publication, actually has their authors give disclosure statements so they're whether or not the article that they have written if they actually are funded by or work with people who would benefit from this article, and so that's actually a really important thing to note in terms of a number of things. One is in terms of its sort of credibility, in terms of it says here that they are academic rigor, journalistic flair. So they're trying to be sort of like a scholarly thing, combining sort of scholarship and journalism. And so, we've got an academic author, a specialist in psychology, talking about how memory works. That makes sense. So let's take a look a little bit more about what the conversation is. We click, so you can click on the conversation there. We look here, we look around. I looked around a little bit so I can sort of point to things like, we've got along the masthead here, how we're different. It's a collaboration between editors and academics to provide informed news analysis and commentary that's free to read and to republish. And you can see who we are, 10 ways we're different. Who are their partners and funders, so you can find out, for the conversation itself, where they're getting their money from, who's supporting them, who they're partnered with. And so we can take a look there. And seeing a bunch of universities listed there, some other things. You could, if you wanted to sort of get a good sense of that, you could work through all that. Take a look at their charter. What is their charter? So their charter, they're kind of what they're supposed to do. Committed to knowledge-based, ethical, and responsible journalism. You can republish our articles for free. We have no paywall, so they make their stuff freely available. Again, trying to sort of combine journalism with sort of knowledge experts. You can take a look at their whole charter, the republishing guidelines, global network, talking about editors work with scientists, scholars, researchers across the world. They have bases in Australia, Africa, France, US, and UK. And you can take a look at also the message from the editor-in-chief. Some things to note: they consider themselves a global media company, and they've got a database of 36,000 experts. Content is used by over 22,000 sites, etc. So you can sort of get a sense of who they are from this. So, we could kind of fill some of this information out. We also take a look at, we can go back to picture here. So June 19th, 2015 is when it came out. And if I remember right, Inside Out came out last year, so in 2015, so it was pretty relevant, pretty current when the article was published. And some other things, what do we know about the author? We've looked a little bit about the author, subject expert. They've got an institutional affiliation for, I think it's Lafayette College. Yes, Lafayette College, the Department of Psychology. But other than that, they're, don't have any sort of corporate political affiliations that are relevant to the subject. They're a psychologist. We could look up more information about the author. We could just click on her name, see what that takes us to. We can see, read so she's a cognitive psychologist, studies how individuals remember personally, so experienced events. So we've got some more information about her there. And if you wanted to, we can actually click there on. So the articles that she's written for the conversation, but we could actually also, if we wanted to, run her name through various databases, go see if she's got a university webpage that lists her recent publications, etc. So we can get a sense of what she has done as an academic, what she's kind of things she's written and writes about. And then, the Reading Rhetorically handout asks us to do things like, kind of skim the text, get a sense of what it does, where it's going. So if we do that, this is sort of a good pre-reading activity for anything. We've got this here. We've got this idea of, just look at this. There's this idea of sort of puzzle pieces, fixes comes in here, and somehow even before we read the text itself, and it says, we remember something, we put the pieces back together like a puzzle. We've got subheadings here. We construct memories, then we retrieve them. We reconstruct memories, then we retrieve them, connected to this idea of puzzle pieces. The brain does not discard old memories. Okay. Memories connect to one another. We've also got this idea of we don't store memories like books on a shelf. Okay. And memories connect to one another. So, we've got a few ideas here just from skimming before we even start reading about what this article might be doing and talking about. So, we could take a look at more of these questions if we wanted to, and it's good to do so. So, we took a kind of an overview sort of look on the Reading Rhetorically. Let's take a look at the Analyzing Rhetorically handout, and use to ask some questions about, does Pixar's Inside Out show how memory actually works? So, again, the first thing the Analyzing handout asks us to do is to kind of come back here and think about the audience. So we could think about the audience here. We know that the audience for the conversation, we can think about people who are interested in kind of journalistic type writing, but done by academics. So that kind of gives us a sense of an audience to begin with. They're not likely going to be people who consider sort of your tabloid, National Enquirer as their primary reading source or something. It's going to be not necessarily, someone who is interested in a more sort of expert audience, but someone who is not looking to read serious scholarship necessarily. So that kind of helps us kind of pinpoint our audience. We could sort of work through that a little more carefully if we wanted to. I just want to give a sort of a broad overview about things. And we can answer more of these questions if you actually go through and read the whole thing. Writer's stance. What is the writer's attitude towards the subject? Well, if you've read one, if you talk about memory, obviously the author has a real interest in sort of how memory works. The author also, if you read through, seems to have really liked the movie, even though the author, one of the things she says, and we talked about this last week with the enthymeme, that the down here, overall the movie does a good job showing the complexity of human mind. Doesn't get all the details about memory right, how the specifics about the process of memory. She does say earlier that it does a pretty good job of representing, actually she, up here, does a pretty good job of showing how memories are sort of connected together and how memories help define someone's core personality, and the special connection between memories and emotion. She says, the movie does good jobs with all of these sorts of things. And so she seems to actually like the movie, and she does say, when she actually says, the movie perpetuates the myths about memory, the movie's goal was to focus on feelings and their connection to memory. And hey, it's an adventure story with a terrific message that's worth watching. So she is positive about the movie, and she is positive about the study of like how memory itself. She seems really interested in that. So, and those are useful to know. So she's got sort of a more positive attitude, sort of towards it. It's writers who have a sort of a negative attitude either towards the subject or the way, like the thing itself, like a movie. If they don't like the movie and they want to talk about how it's representing a topic, that's going to have an influence on things. So we could talk about, is the information she gives objective? What part of the information is objective? What part of is the author's interpretation? We could talk about some places where she's giving sort of objective. The film shows memories as stable, complete representations of actual events. Something we know is not the case. So here she's kind of we could say these are sort of where she's being objective, and down here where she kind of gives us, hey, it's a fun adventure story with a terrific message worth watching. That's more of her opinion. We could take a look at the context. Where does memory get talked about? Current events, popular issues that could affect people's thinking about the text. Obviously, the movie, when this came out, the movie had just come out, had not been out very long. The movie's about it's been out for maybe 18 months now, and so it's still fairly current. And how does that kind of shape the way we think about things? What's her purpose? Is her purpose entertainment, to instigate public thought and action, support community of common belief, conduct business, government, transmit knowledge to a wider audience, scholarly inquiry? If we could point to those things. I would say actually entertainment is definitely one issue here. Transmitting knowledge to a wider audience, is definitely part of it here. And we might even say she's trying to instigate public thought and action, at least public thought, having us think about the role memory plays in our lives, the role, and sort of reshaping some of the myths, kind of correcting some of the myths that we think about, that we have about memory. Could look at the evidence she offers. And so we could take a look at both the evidence she offers and sort of the way she does references here. Obviously, there's no bibliography. There's no works cited page. We don't actually even get names of articles, names of authors, etc., etc. But what we do have is a bunch of embedded links. Instead, scholars believe that components of events are processed by individual neural modules. Our brain has separate systems for basic cognitive functions. And so if we come over here, a basic systems approach to autobiographical memory, David C. Rubin. So we've got the abstract. We can take a look up, for Rubin, Department of Psychology and Brain Sciences at Duke University. You can see, with the abstract there. Obviously, this is behind a paywall, maybe behind a paywall. We might be able to just download. Actually, we can always see. And it may, yes, it's going to ask us for money, but since we are all affiliated with George Mason University, chances are we could actually, if you wanted to read this article, we could run it through one of the databases through the library and actually get a hold of the entire article. So, so that's one of the things we can look here is how, obviously we know that it's sort of for a more general audience, but people who are actually possibly interested in the scholarship itself, it kind of can push us, uses that. We can take a look at another one of these, how it kind of pushes us towards using Science Direct. Yeah, we're getting another journal scholarly article citation here, and this might actually, so we've got Elsevier, again, it's behind a paywall. Again, there's a good chance we can get a hold of it through the library. And then we could actually go and take a look at her sentence structure, her word choice, and One of the things I'll note that when we're doing a rhetorical analysis of this, obviously you want to think about it also in terms of what it is. We're going to consider issues of sentence structure, word choice, how it uses references, how precise it is. All these issues depend on on the purpose and the context, and the type of publication, etc. If you're going to actually evaluate how this works rhetorically, we can talk about what it does. But if we're actually, we're going to expect it to do a piece published in the conversation, we're expected to do something very different than, for instance, this article, Autobiographical Memory, Exploring Its Function in Everyday Life, published in Memory, the journal Memory. That's a scientific journal, or a scholarly journal, and we're going to expect different standards, different practices, different types of language, different language use, different types of citations, references, precision in its development of its argument, etc., than we are from this piece here that is actually trying to combine good sort of scholarly information, but written in a journalistic style. So the idea here is, again, kind of just giving us a brief overview of some of these things, but kind of looking at these questions and actually finding the various places. Does the writer ask the reader, or ask or expect the reader to do anything? If the answer is yes, where? Why? Where is it happening? Why do you believe that this is happening? Does the author make sure that the reader follows the discussion? What are the signposts that help us do that? Some things we might note here. We could, even if we don't go in and actually look at a really close reading of the text itself, we can note that we've got these pictures with some captions that actually tell us things. In the next section is reconstruct memories when we retrieve them. This tells us here when we remember something, we put pieces back together. Same thing happens here. The brain doesn't discard old memories, and this idea that memories connect to one another. We're told here, books, we don't shelve memories like we do books, and that is one of the issues that gets talked about earlier up here. Let's see. Yes, actually, the idea that Riley's memories are, Day's memories are actually put into a globe, and the globe is stored on a shelf in a library of sorts. So we've got, there's other ways, both the subheadings, the images with the captions that are kind of going on to help us kind of track and understand. And so we could talk about those features of this and sort of doing its analysis. Because one of the things, when you're doing a rhetorical analysis, is part of what you're generally going to, your argument's going to be is, what is the purpose? If we get back to the idea of purpose, what is the purpose of this piece? What is the author trying to do? Because if we're going to think of rhetoric as this idea of rhetoric as the study of how people use language and other symbols to realize human goals and carry out human activities. So we want to say, so what is the goal of this piece? Does Pixar's Inside Out show how memories actually work? What is the goal of the piece, and how are those goals achieved? And part of figuring out the goals, figuring out the audience, figuring out the writer's stance, figuring out who the writer is, etc., etc., and then looking at how language is used there to do all that. So that's kind of just an introduction to all this, to these, the handouts, and to this idea of reading and analyzing rhetorically. We will be practicing these ideas for the next couple of weeks. So we'll be working with them. I'll have you sort of work with them in the discussion forums, have you work with them in homework, and we'll be working towards Project 1, in which you will sort of write a rhetorical analysis and have a much more detailed sort of assignment guidelines on how to put that together and to do that. So if you have any questions, please ask, and thank you.